Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, May the 4th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. It's Public Service Recognition Week. All week, we're focused on the people who keep federal work moving, how policy turns into operations, where the pressure points are, and what federal employees are navigating right now. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, in government, offering your best professional advice doesn't guarantee it will be taken, especially when leaders choose another path. Plus, Congress already strips pensions for some crimes. A new bill would expand the list. Those stories and much more ahead this hour on the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Space Force is getting ready to bring part-timers into its force as it continues to build a personnel model radically different from the other services. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more detail. Anastasia, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
This seems like a very different approach. What exactly is the Space Force doing here?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So the service recently announced it has selected about 250 Air Force reservists who work in space-related fields to transfer in a part-time capacity into the Space Force. So the Space Force is the newest military branch of them, as we know, and they've been trying to figure out how to best manage their force since the service's creation in 2019. In 2024, former President Joe Biden signed the Space Force Personnel Management Act into law as part of that year's defense policy bill, and that allowed the Space Force to abandon this kind of traditional component structure, which includes active duty and reserve components, and create one unified personnel system. So no guard, no reserve. It's one system that blends full-time and part-time people. The idea here is to kind of build a model that is in step with the needs of modern guardians. It would it's supposed to improve recruiting. It's also supposed to help the Space Force attract top talent if they offer this type of flexibility to its personnel, and it would also help retention and kind of keeping service members in uniform longer instead of, let's say, you have kind of a life-changing event, whether you're a parent or you're caring for a parent. So this types of arrangement allows you for more flexibility, and the service can technically accommodate that.
The talking points sound good, but how would it actually work?
Yeah, so these part-timers will be known as guardians on non-station duty. According to the Space Force, part-timers will work mainly in test and evaluation, training support and education, and headquarters staff roles. Last year, the service kind of laid out how it envisions it or how exactly this would work. And it looks like these opportunities, they said, would be episodic, so they're not supposed to last for years. Part-timers are required to complete at least 36 days of service each year to have a good year toward retirement, but the number of days part-timers will be expected to work will depend on their role. They could work Monday through Friday. They could work on weekends. Again, it will all depend on their role. However, one caveat is that commanders will review these positions annually to decide if they're still eligible for part-time service. So we'll see how it will actually play out in practice. Because let's say, so these part-time officers must commit to at least 3 years of service, and enlisted personnel will have to commit to 3 years to 6 years of service if they decide to transfer into the Space Force as part-timers. So for Air Force reservists, for instance, who move into these roles, they might have this expectation that they're able to stay in the role, in this part-time role for a while. But that could change because commanders could review the role and decide that it's not a part-time role anymore. But Air Force reservists with 15 to 18 years of qualifying service who transfer into the Space Force will be allowed to stay in this part-time role until they qualify for retirement.
So what will happen next? How does this get off the paper and into practice?
So the Space Force has been doing this in phases. The initial phase was completed in 2025, and that phase was focused on moving Air Force reservists into full-time roles within the Space Force. Then, 6 months ago, the service opened applications for part-time positions. So, as I mentioned, they selected these 250 people, and if they agree to transfer, they will officially begin that move this summer. The idea is that over time, the Air Force Reserve, Guard, and the Air Force itself will not have space operations as a career field. Reservists working in space-related career fields will have to retrain if they decide that they don't want to move into the Space Force. And in the meantime, the Space Force has also been trying to figure out how to integrate these part-timers into its ranks, how to manage their pay, benefits, retirement, VA eligibility, etc. So, for instance, the service relies on the Air Force's HR systems. They're outdated. They're not suited for the service's needs. So Congress gave the Space Force 5 years to complete this transition and to implement this new model. And the Space Force has been focusing on building this modern IT ecosystem to support this really fundamentally different approach to how they manage talent.
There was some discussion about creating a Space National Guard. Where does this project leave that discussion?
Yeah, this has been a hot button issue in the community for a while. And President Donald Trump, when he was running, he promised to create a dedicated Space National Guard. It is, however, been an unpopular idea among DoD leadership and the White House. But governors of states with Air National Guard space units, they would say there were a couple of things. They would say that A, there was no formal notification, coordination with, or consent obtained from the impacted states. The fight was happening for a long time, and it's over whether Air National Guard space units can be moved into the active duty Space Force without obtaining approval from state governors as required by law. And so governors would say, look, it's unclear how this would impact their states if they lose this talent. But at the same time, Air Guard members were able to apply for full-time positions within the Space Force, or they had an option of retraining and moving into different positions. One more thing that I will add to that, when I was covering, as this fight was unfolding and I was covering it, the majority of Air National Guard personnel said that they would rather retrain into other roles than move into the Space Force.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Anastasia, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry.
Up next, Congress already strips pensions for some crimes. A new bill would expand the list. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.